Welcome to Conversations with Father Bosco, a webinar series hosted by the Office of Mission and Ministry and the Georgetown University Alumni Association. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for this session, A Jesuit Perspective on Finance with Father Quentin Dupont. Our host, Mark Bosco, is a Jesuit priest and a professor and administrator at Georgetown University, an authority on the writers Flannery O'Connor and Greene. His recent works include Graham Greene's Catholic Imagination, Revelation and Convergence, Flannery O'Connor and the Catholic Intellectual Tradition, and Reading Flannery O'Connor in Spain. He is the co-producer and co-director of the award-winning documentary film Flannery, his first film, which had its national broadcast on the PBS series American Masters in March 2021. I'm Kelly Young, Associate Director of Strategic Engagement in Alumni Relations, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. As a quick reminder, today's session is being recorded and the recording will be shared via follow-up email. You may use the questions section of your webinar control panel to submit questions for Father Mark and Father Quentin. Without any further ado, I'm pleased to turn things over to our host, Father Mark Bosco.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And it's good to be back on our Conversations webinar. And today, we're just really excited to welcome Father Quentin Dupont. Quentin, welcome to Georgetown. You've been here a few months now, I think it is. We're really glad to have you for so many reasons, not only because you're such a wonderful guy, but we have somebody now in the tenure track position in the McDonough School of Business, both teaching and doing some research. So I do want our alumni and friends to get to know you a little better in this hour. So can you just tell us a little bit about your own story, where you're from, and what drew you to the Society of Jesus in the first place?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Mark. It's a delight to be able to have this conversation. It's certainly a great joy to be at Georgetown. So I grew up in France, actually, in northern France, very close to the Belgian border. I got to know the Jesuits a little bit sort of by reputation growing up. My dad and his brothers and my grandparents had gone to the Jesuit high school in town, but the Jesuits had actually turned over the high school to the diocese by the time it was my turn to go to high school. So I ended up going to a Christian Brothers high school. I'm still making amends for that, but it was the choice I had growing up, the local high school. I studied economics and accounting as an undergrad, and then minors in finance and business law, and studied abroad as a senior at Santa Clara University. And I was very excited to study at Santa Clara because it was sort of my first chance to discover this Jesuit education that I had heard a lot about growing up. While I was there, studying to, become a CPA eventually, Enron happened, and that kind of shattered my world, honestly.
Enron. Oh, okay, sure, yeah, right.
Enron and WorldCom and
wow.
So I kind of started to question why did I want to be a CPA? What was that all about? And I figured out that what I really wanted to do by being a CPA was trying to help investors figure out what they were investing in, help convey useful information about firms. And so I thought, what would be other ways in which I could help people do useful things and figure out useful information. And one of these things was I saw Jesuits in the classroom, and they're great educators, and they were fun guys, and really good to get to know. A couple of guys lived in my dorm over there at Santa Clara. And so that started to just kind of, make its way in my mind. At the same time, I was fulfilling my finance major. And so there were a lot of ideas about how finance could help situations like, the kind of misconduct that took place at Enron and WorldCom. And so I took a year to do a master's degree in finance, but in the course of that year, discerned that, maybe God was calling me to be a Jesuit. And that's how I entered the Jesuits, and I entered the Jesuits in what was then the California province, precisely because that's where I had gotten to know the Jesuits. So that was in 2003, and a mere 18 years later, here I am.
That's great. We're so wonderful. It's so great to have you. So really, France to California. That's a nice. That's I think a nice trip, a nice direction to go. So I think it's safe to say, and I think most of our alumni and folks listening, When people think of Jesuits in academia, they think of them mostly, I would bet, as scholars in the humanities, right? Theology, philosophy, history, political science, maybe English, like myself. So obviously, it's exciting to have a Jesuit engaged in teaching and scholarship in a business school. Can you just tell us a little bit about your discipline and your area of scholarship? What drew you to the kind of scholarship that you're doing at MSB?
Sure. You know, one of the things that I loved when I was learning about the society, one of the things that I found fascinating actually was that, of course, there were Jesuits who were theologians and philosophers and English teachers and all the, part of this deep tradition of the humanities. But there were also Jesuits who were scientists and, who gazed at the stars and trying to map out the universe all the way back when the first telescopes came around and in the early days of the society. And so I think the society always has had this tradition of pursuing the sciences, broadly speaking. I chose to study finance because, well, first I'm just passionate about the kind of questions that finance looks at. Questions like, how basically finance is how people make decisions, and those decisions happen to deal with money, but it's really about decision making. And I study how things like trust and different factors of trust impact decision making. And so you can, of course, tell that this is still something that stems from my experience of being a 21, 22-year-old and seeing Enron blow up and thinking, how can this happen, right? And what I'm looking at in particular is how things that are not proper to, say, the economic relationship at hand that I might get into as an investor in a firm or something like that, but things that are in my broader context might help me make those decisions. So trust that stems in particular from things like cultural institutions and my personal background or the environment I live in, the kind of social circles that I navigate, that shapes things like in whether I invest in the stock market, what kind of assets I invest in, things like that. And it's true for firms as well. There's a lot of already a lot of research about how cultural factors impact the decision of firm managers. And so it's a really rich area. I think finance and economics have sort of discovered or rediscovered the role of culture over the past 20 years or so. And it's still growing up. Things like, ESG is really a question about investors' preferences. What do they care about? How does the environment they live in impacts how much they care about our common home? And so those are the kinds of questions that I'm really interested in pursuing.
That's cool. So this is your first semester. What are you teaching right now? Tell us a little bit about what you're teaching.
Yeah, so I'm teaching two sets of classes. One set of classes, what we refer to here as BFM, Business Financial Management, which is basically the intro to finance class for all business majors here at MSB. And so it's more of a lecture class, but we still make it pretty participative and have some back and forth and do some problem set solving and this kind of stuff. And the other class I teach is something that's a little newer. BFM has been around, from what I understand, it's been called BFM at MSB for a long time. But a little bit of a newer set of classes at MSB are classes called first-year seminar classes. And those are seminars for freshman students, and they always happen in the fall. So those are brand new students who take a seminar. And the seminar I teach is called Does Finance Benefit Society? And actually this title is from an address to the American Finance Association by the then president of the American Finance Association, who has done a lot of work on trust himself, Luigi Zingales. And he goes about talking about how the great shock of the great financial crisis and what does that mean for our discipline? Does our discipline still have any value added to bring in the world? And so we look at different topics that finance deals with respect to trying to make society it's just a productive and welfare enhancing environment. And so we'll look at things like what's the goal of the firm. We'll look at things like mechanisms of corporate governance. We'll look at things like the great financial crisis. We have to talk about that and what might have triggered it, where this might come from. We'll look at things that are a little newer, like climate finance, which is a big deal right now. We've all heard about that with the Glasgow COP26 meeting going on. And we'll look at issues like access to finance. How can we help people develop the kind of access to finance that will help them in the long run? And finally, we also talk about the Catholic social teaching in finance and the business world. And so this is really, it's a seminar-based class. So it's really very discussion-based, and the students are extremely eager. And they also take part in a case competition in their first semester, which is kind of a big business school thing to do, case competitions. But they get to do that right away from the get-go. They just had their first round of presentations last week. Very impressive. I had invited a couple of judges, including a Jesuit who had been president of one of our universities for a couple of decades, and he was just blown away. I can't believe those are first semester freshmen. The kind of presentation to put together. This is just stellar. So anyway, it's a great joy. It's a great joy to teach those classes.
Well, I think there is such an added value to having you there, because no matter what you're talking about, and I only because I know it's because from living with you as a Jesuit here at Georgetown, and even before when we connected in Seattle, when you were still, I guess, a regent back then, right?
That's right.
But there is a sense of how does Catholic social thought, how does the ethical framework of faith, I mean, that's all about a kind of trust, a kind of covenant between people, between institutions, between corporations. So there's a lot, I think, that we bring to a business school, right? And I'm so glad that not only do we have it in terms of content, but we have it in terms of presence now with you in the classroom. Do you ever see a course just on Catholic social teaching and business ever being a possible course at the MSB?
It's interesting. I was just before being here, actually, I was in a conversation with one of the associate deans about, what kind of courses could I, help with and potentially put together going forward. And this is certainly something we talked about. I think Catholic social teaching has a lot to contribute to the business conversation. In particular, one of the documents that we'll deal with in my first year seminar next week is a document called The Vocation of the Business Leader, which was put together by the Vatican Dicastery for Integral Human Development some years ago, before it was called that, when it was still the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. And this document is just it's amazing. I mean, it talks about the business, really being a business leader as being someone who has a vocation to, contribute to the common good, a vocation to, help bring meaning into the world, how business is other-oriented, how a business is a community of persons, and how business in general is fostering a community of relationships. And this is inherent to what business is. And I think that at MSB, there's really this understanding that, you could call it our brand, you could call it, our culture, you could call it what gets us out of bed in the morning, if you want to quote Father Arupe. But there's really this awareness, this understanding that business works for the good of society, that it ought to work for the good of society. It has so much potential. And right. So I think there's a lot we can do about Catholic social teaching and business. And I think it goes both ways. I think business also has some things to teach to the way in which we do Catholic social teaching. As a matter of fact, you might remember this, Mark, but way back when the Jesuit Post put out a book some years ago, I was still in theology, I was invited to write a chapter on the relationship between Catholic social teaching and finance. And the whole chapter is about how the two can contribute and learn from each other. And I think we can really make that happen here at MSB, and there's great demand in that. One thing I heard when I was interviewing at Georgetown was our students want to hear about Catholic social teaching, how our Ignatian identity is actualized in a business setting, not just buzzwords, but actually, talk about it and, move the conversation forward. And so it's a great delight to be in an environment where, people want to have those conversations. The students want to have those conversations, faculty want to have those conversations, and certainly the college leaders, the school leadership, from Del Almeida on, they're all really, really committed in making that happen, making that a reality for every student, every faculty, every staff here at MSB.
That kind of goes to the, what's the texture of the unique kind of place of a Jesuit and Catholic business school? You did your doctorate at a state university, right? And you taught as well, I believe.
Yes.
So what do you think are some of the differences between teaching business at a Jesuit Catholic university like Georgetown versus a state university? Or maybe to put it another way, how do you talk about the added value that MSB brings to the study and the skill formation, I guess, of a business school?
Yeah, so, I guess there might be a cynical view that says, well, business education is professional education. You teach people skills and, you give them a toolbox. And so whether you go to, school X or Georgetown, it should be the same. And truth is, it's not, far from it. One thing that struck me right away, just very broadly at the university level, to talk a little bit about the context of the university. At the new student orientation, when all the freshmen and their families gathered in front of White Gravener under the sun and the heat, Jack DeGioia, the president of the university, talked about their time at Georgetown as being a time of formation. And this might seem like an innocuous word, but in Jesuit speak, as you know, Mark, this is a very important word. This is the word we use when we talk about our training in the Society of Jesus.
Right.
And what President DeGioia was talking about was, we're offering you this training in the ethos, the spirit, the tradition of the Society of Jesus. And so there's this understanding of education that's far from transactional, an education that's actually transformative and that's collaborative. And I think that sets the tone at the university level. I think at the school level, to come back to this first year seminar case competition I was talking about, typically case competitions are like, value a company or, draw a strategy for whatever, Procter & Gamble, things like that. Every year in the first year seminar, the context for the case competition is a non-for-profit. This is what we teach students when they come in their very first semester. Business is there to help people who help those in need. And this just runs through the entire ethos of the place. And you see that in the mission statement of MSB that was just redone, from what I understand, a year or two ago, where they really talk about, of course, they talk about global business education. It's Georgetown, it's a global university.
Right.
But they really also talk about our students being ethical leaders for the common good. And this is something that the school and the faculty here, everyone I've met, is committed to enacting, to working towards, to implementing, and to fostering in their day-to-day interactions, in their interactions with students, but also in their research. There's a lot of research that happens around things that fall under the common good umbrella, things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, things like the Center for Business for Impact, and the Center for Ethics and Markets. There are all those centers here that are really dedicated to fostering a perspective for our students, for our staff, for the local community, for what Georgetown and MSB represent globally, to better understanding the value of a Jesuit education at Georgetown.
Yeah. I want to go back to a point you made too. You said, you talked about these kids hungering for this, and I was just wondering. So you've gotten to meet a lot of Hoyas in the last few months this semester, and besides, of course, your work in MSB, you're celebrating Mass in Dahlgren Chapel, in the Copley Crypt with students. You're going to be, I think, leading retreats. We'll talk about in a second. But so just, what do you think? What's been your impression of students, faculty, and staff over these last few months?
It's been an overwhelming welcome. I don't know if it's just like the joy of people being back on campus after a year and a half, or
No,
if
it's all about you, Quentin. It's all about you.
No, but if it's just the place that's like that in general.
It is.
I'm just blown away by how welcoming people have been, and welcoming not just to me but to one another. Students, you see those first year students, you ask them to get into groups and how they just right away get to work together and all of these things. I was thinking, Georgetown has this worldwide reputation, right? I remember being like 12 years old and being at the French equivalent of like Sports Authority, and there's this Hoyas baseball jersey that they have for sale, and of course that's what I bought. I didn't want the Yankees baseball jersey. I'm not a Yankees fan, but I'm a Hoyas fan. Everybody loves the Hoyas. Pat Ewing, Dikembe Mutombo. What a that international brand. You think of Georgetown as this big machine, this world-renowned institution, world-class research, great scholars, and you come here and all you find was people who are just super welcoming, who want to have conversations, students who are just excited to get to see someone wearing a Roman collar in Hariri building. All those, the very real reality of it is basically a big welcoming family, and that's been an overwhelming feeling for me of just, you come in, it's a big operation. I didn't really know what to expect. And what I found was just an incredibly welcoming environment from the faculty and staff side of things, and the students. I mean, I remember after my first class, when the students asked me, are you Jesuits? Do you also say Mass sometimes? And I said, yeah, of course I say Mass. Over there on Sundays, Dahlgren, and they're just very excited about the Jesuit ethos of the place, and of course being part of the Hoya family. That really gets people going, and so it's really a privilege to be part of this Hoya family.
It is true. I mean, I came 5 years ago, and there was a sense of hospitality and a really warm welcome, and that word family does fit Georgetown in a way. I mean, you and I have worked at other universities, and they're great universities. Don't get me wrong, but that's part of the texture is this idea that you do belong. We're glad to have you, and of course, unfortunately, students sometimes have to take a long time to understand that or to sense that, whereas other students right from the beginning. And I guess what's wonderful about you is you got plopped down right after kids had been away for so long. So you're part of the excitement of coming back, the excitement of kind of rebooting in some ways after 18 months of virtual life, right? So it's a great time, I think, to be at Georgetown.
And you could really feel that. I don't know how many of the alums on the line got a chance to come back to campus over the past few months, but back when they started reopening the building here, you could just feel the excitement, just the energy in the building, and that was just such a great vibe. And I'll say one more thing, Mark. The welcome I got from the Jesuit community, and my first couple weeks here, so many Jesuits. I introduced myself, and we chat a little bit. What's your name? What do you do? And so many of them said, "Thank you for coming to Georgetown." And I was just, I didn't know what to answer. I mean, when you hear that from people who have been giving so much of their life to this place, people who are world-renowned scholars, people who are names you've heard about for, a decade plus in the society. And those guys are just, thank you for being here. I'm the one who's just giddy about being here, but they were just so incredibly welcoming as well. And we really have a great Jesuit community here.
Yeah, I totally agree. Great guys, really great guys. Very supportive of each other and of the mission, and know how to enjoy each other's company, which is really a plus. I remember we were talking the other night with some alumni at another thing. We were talking about kind of that the fact that Jesuits are kind of the priest professors, that there's always a kind of double identity that we put in our own lives. And you were talking about the fact that you really loved coming to Georgetown because that got actualized in a way that it had never before. Can you respond a little bit? I think we were talking about the Jesuit values and things like that, but you were talking about how exciting it was to put those two together.
Yeah, so like you said, I was a grad student at a state institution. That's kind of where, I had done Regency. I had taught university. I had taught high school, but you go through those phases of formation, and then I went to graduate studies where you get formed in academia, right? And so I got formed by the society, and I continue to get formed by the society, of course, but more intentionally, pre-ordination. And then I got formed in academia in this secular environment, and I come here, and it's like the two streams join together, and I really, and it's happened every week since we started teaching. There are times when after class or after a conversation with students or something like that, I just kind of catch myself and I said, I get to be a Jesuit at work. This is amazing. I get to be this Jesuit priest who teaches, who's engaged in research conversations, who talks to staff about planning retreats and courses and stuff like that. And this is all one thing that's happening all together at the same time. I just pinch myself. There's no better world that I can think of, right? I think as a priest professor, the way in which I interact with students is so much more intentional on the cura personalis, the education of the whole person, framing this, whatever we're dealing with, in the first year seminar or in BFM, as an opportunity to learn to be women and men for others. All these Jesuit things that are very vivid for us Jesuits and for all the members of the Ignatian family, we get to share by virtue of our work with young men and women who are students who are so eager to learn about the world, and they gotta take this and run with it. And what a treat! And then you go to Dahlgren and you say mass, and you're not just the priest who just is there to visit for Sunday mass or weekday mass or whatever. You are also one of the associates of this educational endeavor who does this type of ministry as part of the educational work that we get to do.
Yeah.
And so it's just such a life-giving, multi-dimensional work life.
Yeah.
I'm at loss for words. It's just.
But you're right. So as an administrator, when President DeJoy asked me to take this job and leave a previous institution, I was like, can I still teach? Because I said I want to still have. I want to be involved and engaged with the entire sense of the university and how we're transforming students, how they're transforming us, how we're listening to where they are. Their needs and hungers are different than 10 years ago, and just it's a wonderful kind of playing field, you might say, to be both Jesuit priest and professor. Yeah, you mentioned a little bit about this. that you're working on some retreats, and as the director of mission, vice president for mission and ministry, I'm really excited about the work that you and Father Ron are doing, and even and Father Travis, I think, who's in the executive MBA program. Is that right? But
right.
This is, of course, an undergrad retreat for the MSB, and we've never done anything just for the MSB quite like this. But since this is the 500th anniversary of Ignatius of Loyola's conversion, what we've been calling the Cannonball Year or the Cannonball Moment in Ignatius's life, it was really a kind of a retreat on discernment in the business school. Can you just tell us what you're planning and when these are going to happen?
Yeah, but just to back up a little bit, so you're right to point out that I didn't quite think about it like that until you mentioned that. But here at MSB, we have Jesuit staff, Father Ron, student, Father Travis,
yeah,
and faculty. We got all bases covered, and we're all involved in this retreat. So this is a retreat for undergrads, and mostly aimed at sophomores and juniors, which is the time when you don't just narrow down your major or try to pin down your major. You also try to look out for internships and make some already pretty serious career choices in terms of do I want to do investment banking or do I want to do fintech, something like that, and so. The idea behind this retreat, of course, is this cannonball moment of Ignatius, who was for a year and a half in isolation and questioning a lot about his life and rediscovering all about his own value system and getting to know this God who was calling him to, it turns out, do something quite different than what he thought he was headed towards. And I think we've all had those moments in the 18 months of our own isolation between March 20 and September 21, give or take, where our own value system, our own way of looking at the world has been a little turned upside down in very dramatic ways and very unpleasant ways and very sad and tragic ways, of course. But also in ways that I think have helped us rediscover what might matter most, what is really important. And you see this in the everyday conversations. If you keep up with the news, people who figure out the benefits of working from home and being around family more and cutting down on the commute. People who reevaluate the trade-off between do I want to work or do I want to care for my family. And those are real conversations that people have where they kind of look again at what was and what needs to be and how the two might be a little different. What we'd like to do with this retreat is giving an opportunity to the undergrads to say, there are all those very charted paths about if you want to go in the investment banking world, well, you just interview spring of your sophomore year, and then you do your internship, and then you get the offer, and then you start working, and after 5 years, this is what's going to happen. X, Y, Z. Same thing in accounting with auditing and all these things. But do we need to go the charted autopilot route, or can we think a little bit about what we have learned about what's important about understanding the nature of our deepest desires, about looking at the world's greatest needs and how our deepest desires can meet the world's greatest needs as a fruitful path for your career. So, a big thing that this vocational business leader document that I was mentioning earlier talks about is how, business and work really are matters of fulfillment and flourishing. And I think this is really what we're trying to lead those undergrads to through giving them the tools of discernment in thinking about their life choices, their careers, and all sorts of decisions that they will face as young people. COVID has really taught us that the world is a big place with many possibilities and a lot of dire needs. And I think this in a sense gives us a new way to look at what we might encourage those young men and women to think about when it comes to pursuing a life that's fulfilling, life-giving, and leads them to flourishing and to the flourishing of others, which is, a big part of what, of course, educating for the common good is about.
Yeah, no, it's just great. We've, in many ways, Father Ron and I have been talking for a while about how, and Dean Almeida, how do we engage the undergrad business students more? And this just came, this notion of this anniversary just, opened up a door really for us to, and can kind of select that, do it as a group of MSB students maybe, and not just university. I think you're going to both the Jesuit Retreat House in Maryland and Faulkner, and then I think you're also doing one in at Calcanini Contemplative Center, the Georgetown one. So that's going to be really nice. But so I really appreciate you as just somebody who helps kind of serve the retreat program here at Georgetown. This is a great addition to us. Yeah. When I was running this Catholic center called the Hague Center, we put together, I was really interested in how we might, what we might call the business of social justice. Like, how do we foster this passion for forming students to use their talents, for Hoyas to use their talents and skills for the common good? But at the same time, we need to professionalize and structure the world of not-for-profits. What I found, I brought a bunch of business folks, and then business faculty, and then not-for-profit, directors of Catholic charities, Lutheran charities, orphanages, and soup kitchens. And I don't think they've ever really talked to each other until this time. And I always thought it was kind of this need really to kind of, it's mutual, right? How can business help the non-for-profit do its important work of taking care of the poor and the marginalized? So I just know, do you have any ideas or any thoughts about how do you see business or business schools doing this? And do you see that already playing out in your own teaching and research?
Yeah, again, I keep coming back to this kind of case competition thing. So this year, the non-for-profit, that's the client, is So Others Might Eat, which was started by a Jesuit years ago, and has just undergone a strategic plan, and now they're looking to implement their strategic plan. And so to implement parts of the strategic plan, they basically, told our students, we have this problem, can you help us solve it? And you'd be amazed how good those solutions are. I mean, it's just wild. They're very implementable. The students give you like a budget. They say you can do this for somewhere between $2,500 and $5,000. It takes 3 months to do. These are, agencies.
Were they working like little groups or something together as teams?
Yeah, so they're in groups of 5.
Okay.
And then they pitch those presentations. Actually, there's some semifinals tonight. I really look forward to seeing some of those ideas. But it's very concrete, right? You have 10 minutes to help offer solutions for some, as it's called, to work on this part of their strategic plan. I think more maybe broader picture. This comes back to what I was talking about the fact that Catholic social teaching can learn from business, and the way in which we talk about what we want to promote the common good. This sounds like a great idea, but if you ask 20 different people around this building what's the common good, you might get 12 or 19 or 20 different responses. And on my first day here, actually, on my first day on the job, there was this new faculty orientation, and next to me was a new faculty, but who's a very accomplished person, brand new at Georgetown, but who had basically spent half of his career other places. And I introduced myself, and he says, "Oh, you're a Jesuit. Well, I'd like to study the common good because I'm not sure people know what this is real about, and I'm actually not clear about what this is about. So I'd like for the two of us to write articles about the common good and helping people understand the common good and how that can help organizations do good in the world." I mean, this is my first day. What else would you want? This is great. So just an anecdote to illustrate how both I think in the classroom and in the research side of things here at MSB, we're really committed to the kind of idea you have about how do we help social justice, nonprofit, how do we help things like, bringing forth the common good, which is part of the mission statement of MSB. How do we do that concretely?
Yeah.
And we're committed to that, and the kind of classes that I was talking about earlier in my meeting about teaching going forward just earlier this afternoon, we're talking a lot about that, about how we can help. It doesn't have to be that we're going to create a class just for people who are in a nonprofit world. What we want is create a class that opens up the conversation and kind of, in the end, managing people and running an efficient organization and doing sustainable business happens whether you're a non-for-profit or not. The way in which the organization works and how the firm or the business kind of funds itself and those kinds of things, that's a little different. But the day-to-day, I don't know if it's that different. And so the goal would actually be to bring these people together as students and to be able to foster this conversation to students and executives, professionals from all backgrounds, so that they can also learn from each other's experience.
Yeah, I remember talking to a young diocesan priest once who was just made a pastor, and he said, I really wasn't trained for this, for like running a grade school and resurfacing the parking lot and also doing confessions, right? And there was a sense that something
doing payroll, firing, things like that.
Right. No, I do think that there's a place for, and I mean, the Catholic community especially has kind of always had, parish councils, and a lot of people in those councils were people who could do the kind of skill sets and talents that, perhaps the group of women religious or the priests or are people who were really didn't have the education for. And so I mean, all of those, building a new church, it was usually a dozen people who would say to the pastor, let us help you, or let us handle this, right?
Actually, we'll do it.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think more and more it's just how do we invite those who really whose passion really is that service component, but don't know structures and don't know the systems that make that structure or that make that component work. So yeah, I've just always loved I've loved that kind of synergy, and I think that we do that really well at our Jesuit schools, especially, and with really the leadership going on at MSB, it's palpable. You can feel it in the language and in the invitations to do more and more. So it's pretty cool. So before we kind of go to some questions and stuff, I always, people are always interested that, there's about 20, depending on how you count, there's 24 Jesuits who kind of work at some level at the University of Georgetown, another 20 others, and we talk about what we're reading, and we sometimes pass books to each other, and a lot of Hoyas, they're interested in what's going on in the mind of a Jesuit. What's his reading? So what are you reading right now? What book or two would you might recommend to Hoyas?
Sure. So I'm reading. I'm kind of picking up during the pandemic. I kind of picked up some old theology classics, as I didn't have to. Well, I didn't get to or have to, however you look at it, commute to school anymore. So I kind of used my commute time to do a little bit more reading on old kind of classics of theology. And I've been slowly making my way through Edward Skillebec's Jesus, which I've really enjoyed. I've gotten quite a few homilies out of that, to be honest. It's a lot. I take in really in bite size.
Big book, wow.
It's about 700 pages, I think. But when I have a half hour, an hour, and I don't have 400 things on my mind, I just kind of read a little bit of that, and I find it's just very, very rich, very inspiring, and good food for the soul.
And Skillebec was so important to the Vatican, too. I mean,
absolutely. And you can feel the spirit of the Vatican II renewal.
Yeah.
On a more, kind of like business read stuff, I've been reading from a name that's been in the news with the Glasgow meeting those past couple of weeks. Mark Carney, who was governor of the Bank of Canada and then of the Bank of England, wrote a book called Value (S), and it really is about the value and values inherent to economics and finance. He's also a committed Catholic. So he brings forth a lot of those notions of common good, but he was in charge of a central bank of a couple of major countries there for a number of years, and so he also has sort of the gravitas and the knowledge. He's an econ PhD, so he has the oomph to just kind of also flesh it out, and it's a really great book. I'm also reading on the more academic side of things. I just picked this up, the newest issue of the JFE here a few days ago, and this one is great. It's on socially responsible investment, and in particular, environmentally responsible finance, and just a lot of really, really great article. And if I may recommend a book I used for my first year seminar, Economics for the Common Good by Jean Tirole, who's also a Nobel Prize in econ.
Wow.
Very, of course, very thoughtful, but also a book that talks about a number of realities in economics and a number of realities in the kind of socio-political, even geopolitical kind of landscape that we're in right now, and we've been in for a while. So yeah, kind of trying to keep a little bit of theological reading, a little bit of kind of businessy type reading, some academic stuff, and then this book I use for class, which I think the undergrads really like, actually. And it's written, so Jean Tirole is French, and so he writes in this kind of more French way of writing, which I think for the undergrads is a little different. So
it's kind of
yeah, a little bit more like this.
Yeah.
And so it's part of kind of, hey, there's a great big world out there. There are people who write in long sentences. So
Great.
It's a cool book.
So I want to, we can move into some questions and answers time here. So I just want to remind our audience that if you would like to submit some questions, you can do that via the questions section of the control panel. So feel free to do that. A couple questions. One was, you mentioned, it kind of goes back to this idea of, you just mentioned about the environment. Business and the environment, Pope Francis especially, and really the whole church, but even the patriarch, the Holy Patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Church, they call them the green popes or the environment. And it's so much of our economic life is either, impinges upon or improves our common home, nature, the world. Do you see that as a growing place for finance and in your own work, perhaps?
Absolutely. So in my own work in particular, but generally in academic research right now, what we call ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues, is just a huge area of research right now. And so every day there's something called the Social Science Research Network, which people kindly refer to as SSRN, sends emails about, like, here are the papers that were shared on the network in the past, whatever, week or something like that. And usually every day there's an email.
Wow.
Over the past 3 months, the number of ESG papers that I've seen on there is staggering. There was a call for paper by one of the kind of, we call it A- journals, so not like the top 3, but just immediately below that. Academic journals has a call for research proposals out on finance for the greater good. And in particular, what they cite is, how can financial instruments or financial contracts help with respect to mitigating climate change or the problems inherent to the what we call the coordination problem in the climate change issue. And so this is a big issue in research right now, broadly. Even so, JFE is one of those top 3 journals. They just published this issue. Lots of very very smart and very dedicated people working on that. And this is something I've been talking about with a couple of colleagues out here, and with my advisor too, who's written about environmental misconduct some years ago, and we were able to partner with a couple of people who have very rich data on environmental violations and emission stuff, and we're trying to find a way to see what's happening. The world has been changing with respect to awareness to climate change and the peril of what's happening to our common home. And so those are things that probably will change how people make decisions. And so a lot of people are looking at that right now.
Yeah, cool. One of our alums asked, Father Dupont, given the name of your freshman seminar, and again, maybe we've talked about this, but maybe just put it all in focus. Can you answer the question overall, does finance benefit society? So you're on trial.
I am on trial. So when I was visiting family this summer, I told them I was putting this course together, and everybody wanted to know, what's the answer? What's the answer? Yes or no? And they were, my family and friends were quite puzzled when I said, I don't know yet. Depends on the conversation we're going to have. Because in a seminar, it's not so much me telling students what is and what is not, but it's about the kind of journey we go through by reading those readings and talking about them. I think where we are right now, a little over halfway through the course, but 2/3 of the way, we're at an interesting point in the course where we see a lot of good that finance can do, and we see a lot of ways in which it doesn't do good. And so that's helping students understand the context of finance such as it is and what they might get into, as professionals. I think, if you ask for my personal opinion, I think finance is essential in doing good. Finance solves some key problems. We have households who want to buy a house and happen to not have $2 million at the ready. And we have banks who happen to have deposits. Well, finance allows the savers to meet the would-be borrowers, and for people to realize their dreams, and for entrepreneurs to have funding to create all the innovation that allows us to have things like vaccines and all these things. So I think the baseline is yes. The details are fuzzy and very important. How this gets done, what ways do people take advantage of the system for themselves rather than for the good of others? That's a key problem, and that's a big part of what I've been studying things like corporate and organizational misconduct and the ways in which we can mitigate those type of issues.
Wow, great, good answer, huh? One final question then, and then we're going to wrap it up from somebody. Will you be teaching ever in the master's, the executive MBA, or just the MBA program, or do you see yourself mostly with the undergrads?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. That's part of the meeting I was having today. I don't get to make my own teaching portfolio, so this depends on the administration of the school. I think both the administration of the school and myself are very interested in talking to as broad an audience as possible. And so there is a desire on everybody's part that I would be able to have a course that's meaningful to the master's students, be they executive MBAs or MBAs or master in management students, or other masters that are part of the McDonough School. And I talked earlier about your deepest desires meeting the world's greatest needs. Well, This is sort of like my deepest desires meeting the school's greatest needs, and so there's a bit of a matching sequence there going on. And I'm very interested in that. The school's very interested in that. We got to find a way in which this works in the curriculum or the curricula of various programs, and of course that is of interest to students. And that's really, we try to teach things that students want to learn about. And so it's not about me talking about things I like to talk about. It's about students learning something they're eager to learn about. And so I think what we finished with that meeting was we're going to talk to the various program directors, see what they see as the demand, and then we'll try to put a course or two together certainly having a foot in the undergrad world and a foot in the graduate world, and maybe also in something called executive education, which are programs that are non-degree seeking, might be a possibility, and something that I'd very much look forward to. I taught executive MBAs, well, TA'd for executive MBAs, and did a little bit of teaching in the course of the TA when I was in doctoral studies, and I love executive MBAs. They have so much to offer about their work experience.
Right.
They're great to work with. I love to work with that group and graduate students in general.
That's great. Well, Quentin, thank you so much. I know that we're just all pleased that you're with us and that you're part of the Jesuit community now. And I have to say, you said it early on in our conversation, but having a Jesuit priest walking through the halls there, getting to know colleagues, it gives a different kind of just a different kind of vision of what the place is like, and it allows an invitation for conversations, questions, and of course we do know that our faculty and staff there are just as much hungry for deep conversations with Jesuits, so you offer that as well. So thank you very much. I'm so glad we could get you. I'm glad the provincials allowed us to nab you for Georgetown, and we hope you have many, many years here. I want to thank you for the time, and I want to thank the alumni relations for putting this together for us. And we'll be doing more conversations with Father Bosco in the months ahead. Stay tuned. Everybody, I think it's not too early to say gobble, gobble, gobble. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll be back with you another time. Thanks, Quentin.
Thank you, Mark.